Okay, my outstanding friends, a new chapter has begun. I've noticed just within the last month or so, there's been a real big increase in the amount of attention paid to these ancient texts, monuments, documents, the things in Egypt and so forth. And there's a big thing by the History Channel saying that there are things in Egypt we cannot really explain. Well, there's virtually everything they can't explain. Outside of the fact that it is there, it was written about, we consider it mythology, just silly stuff they wrote about for whatever reason. And now it's being taken serious because the evidence is supported by the statements and the claims and the things that were etched in the walls is supported by physical evidence of giants and all the rest. And now we're going to look at something specific right now, which is Petra. Nobody's been able to explain Petra, and I can. But you have to use mud fossil intelligence. It's easily understood once you can open your eyes and see big enough to understand what we are really literally living on and what history is really all about. This is not a big joke. Some people, just silly people all around the entire world, started doing all these crazy drawings and making up history that was just sounds like something out of Star Wars, and now they're starting to take another new interest in it. It was a big interesting thing 10, 15, 20 years ago about ancient astronauts and how they came from space, but there's no evidence. Now there's evidence. All they had was little etchings and drawings and things, and they said, these are just people that taking psychedelic drugs, and they were eating mushrooms and they were doing all this stuff. No. Now the evidence supports the statements, and I'm going to show you right now about Petra, and if you can explain Petra in any other way than my explanation, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you anyway. I want to do some interviews on this stuff and get this stuff out. It's being suppressed terribly. And it's like the same thing that always done by academia. Not peer-reviewed. It hasn't been peer-reviewed. I have CAT scans of DNA, specimens, evidence showing support for huge, huge, huge creatures. I'm talking about 200-foot tall human beings. I have the evidence, and I have it, and it's DNA tested, and bits and pieces are CAT scanned, and I want to get this done and get it over with. This is crazy to suppress this for this amount of time by this amount of people. I would have never expected they could have kept this quiet for this long. Now, I'm going to show you Petra, and again, I want to make this known, and I'd love to talk to History Channel, Giorgio, or any of them. They've been talking about this stuff for a very long time, and now I have the evidence to support their claims. So I'll show you the evidence about Petra. Okay, I like to start with as far away as you can get to the source and sort of hone in on it. This is Petra. These are these little cuts through the rock face. All right, now, what can we learn about this from this distance? Well, we know that it's composed of basically the same looking stuff. And there is some kind of texture to this. If you look at it close up, which we will in a moment, there is a pattern to these. And then you also notice this right here. I look at the plant life, like that one right there, growing right there. Why is that growing right there? Why are these green things growing where they're going, and they grow very green where they are green, and why are they just here or there? So that's something we can think about. Now let's get a little closer and see if we see anything that really stands out. All right, so now we're coming down a little closer. There's the treasury. And it's right there in the face of the wall there. And they've got these deep gouges through here. And they seem to run on a flat, like, plate around here. Now, the other thing we see is, again, this patterns. These stripy looking patterns. Now, if you ask a geologist, they would say, oh, that's sedimentation. It just happens. They get this and that, and they would just walk away fairly quickly, because you cannot support those statements. It's just not true. So here we have the treasury, fabulously carved. Up above here, they carved in, and I'll show you that in a second. I know what this is, and I think you will in a moment too. But remember these blocky little stripes. We're going to get a little closer here and look real close at the treasury itself and see if we can make any conclusions. All right, I gave it some thought. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. Well, let's do it the easy way. I'm just going to tell you what this is. If you've been following me at all, or you're even on this channel, you know probably that my claims are that there is nothing but biology, and this is biology. Not only is it biology, it is muscle tissue sarcomeres. And the sarcomeres are running in this direction. They pinch this way. So it could be a guy's body fell over, and this up here is the outside tissue, fatty layer of skin and so forth up above here that covers the muscle fibers. These are muscle fibers. Look at them carefully. Now I'm going to take some time to do this because I want you to understand what you're looking at here. That's the treasury, they call it. That, my friends, is carved from what was here originally. I'm going to tell you what was here originally in 1 second. Now, nobody carved these big cuts through here. You would say, well, how did they get there? And I would say they were there originally when this thing was a living creature, and this was the muscle, and this was how the blood flowed through here from one big artery. Well, what's an artery? Well, there's blood in an artery. It's packed with blood. This was still basically packed with blood, and they just worked that blood like it was putty and carved and this is just one treasury. There was dozens and dozens of them over there in Petra, in this area, and because there was dozens and dozens of huge body parts that were like hearts, lungs, and they could carve right into them. They were just made up of basically putty. Red blood turns into mud. When it erodes, it turns into mud. There's a bunch of other stuff in there, other inclusions within the bloody matrix, which is the connective tissue and so forth. But body flesh turns into mud. And that's what all this dust is around here, and all the dirt and everything. It's just eroded flesh, because this is flesh. That's 100% flesh right there. All of these are muscle sarcomeres. I'm going to show you in extreme detail. This would have been a guy's skin up in here. I'd have to look at it better. This is the best shots I've got, but I would say the skin goes up this way. Now, I talked about the plants, the way they grow. Look at this. You see how red that is? You see how red that is right there? That's because there's a lot of blood there. Wherever there's blood, there will be things growing. Things love blood. They just grow out of the blood. Like over here, right down in here. That's the one that's really bloody, and it's going to grow strong in there. So I understand geology now, that it is all biology. Now, certain areas will be more bloody than other areas. This was a very bloody area where blood settled. It's probably got some kind of a dishy form to it, and the stuff settled in here. And then finally, when everything, the waters settled after the Great Flood, they flushed out through this and left these floors underneath these gouges. So we've got the muscle sarcomeres, and I'm going to show you two. You saw them right here. You see them everywhere. They're not just right here. Those are everywhere. All the way down here, everywhere. Everywhere. They're everywhere. So let's take a look at what muscles are made of, and do they represent this? Am I just being crazy? Well, I don't think I'm being crazy. These are muscles. This is, electron microscope shot of muscles. You see all the sarcomeres? You see this blood clot right here. There could have been an artery up in here, and these big gouges here are where the blood runs. This could be Petra right here, and these here are the gouges running through here. And now people walk through these gouges, and they chiseled through the blood. I don't see a whole big difference here, my friends. Not a big difference at all. Now, let's get up close and personal with the artery, yes. The treasury. I claim that is an artery. And that artery fed blood through these channels to support those muscles. Now, I have things to support everything I'm saying. There's an artery right there. And this just happens to be it. All right, that's the casing, which is this right here. I took and buffed up a space right there, and so I could see what it is, and it is an artery. And I had a picture of an artery here somewhere, but anyway, that is an artery. Hold on, I better prove it. All right, you see that? That's what an artery is. That's the walls of the artery, which is this. I buffed up this one little spot, and under the microscope you can see it. Here it is right here. So that's the artery, and this is this right here. So that little spot's just cleaned up enough where you can see it is what it is, and it's an artery. Now, I have gigantic things. That's not huge, basically. This is a 2-inch wide hair follicle. And here it is right here. Here's what a hair follicle is somewhere. There it is right here. You see, this is what I'm holding, the same thing. That right there is where the muscle attaches. That makes your hair stand up on end like that. This is the sebaceous gland. You see it? The oily stuff. And that would have been up here. The hair shaft runs up through that sebaceous, which is sunk to here. See the goopy stuff? That's this. And then the hair shaft, the root comes down here, and you have the papilla down the bottom, the red and the blue, the blood. It's 2 inches wide. Now, what it's from, I don't know. It hasn't been tested or anything, but it's quite obvious what it is. And that's the thing. Now, they say, oh, it just looks like this. It just looks like that. No, it is that because it is what it is. Now, my other stuff's been DNA tested. That's DNA tested. It's a left human hand, and that you have the same tendon there. Thump, 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 thump. If you put your hand back, go like this, your left hand. That's it. There's the cleave in between the pads. This is the grip skin, the silver stuff, which just peels right off. You see it flaking off? This is very heavy-duty stuff you have on your hands and your feet. And it's the left hand. It's about 4 feet wide, something like that up here, about 3 feet wide down here. This was DNA tested, and I have fingers and knuckles and all kind of stuff from that. And they've been CAT scanned too. Now I have a bigger one than this. This is the bigger one right here. That's 3 feet long, from the very back to the very, very front. 3 feet long. And that's a fingernail. All right, let's take your time and look at this. Just open your mind. This is 3 feet long, from here to here. Now, what does a fingertip consist of? Well, first of all, there's a fingernail. And that's it right there. You see it come running down here? This is just some leaves here. And this is it's very, very well preserved. Now, there's also a little piece of cartilage, basically, that's right behind the fingertip that lets it rock on the next bone, which is this round little pad here. Now, there's also a vein and an artery, and they're saturated with blood, fingertips, and that's this here and this here. Now, fingers are very heavily coated with keratins and collagens and really rubbery, tough, elastic, but mostly I believe it's the keratins are the ones that are a lot of silicon and dense as hell. So there was no way I could get any blood out of this, but I wanted to get some blood to do a DNA test. So I had to break this piece off right here. And I broke that off with a hammer, and it came off just like a blood scab. You see, this is the piece right here. It was right like this here. Right there, that's where the fingernail was. This wrapped over the side over here. And that's where the fingerprints started. Right there, these are fingerprints. I'll show you any other shot I have. All right, so don't forget, that's 3 feet long. Now, I got the fingerprints around here somewhere. Here, right here. Now, and I also talked about the grip skin, which is this. It popped right off just like that. And you can't get it. See, this is keratinized, keratin. That's that tough. There's no blood in there. There's no blood to speak of in here. Except there is one little spot in between these two pieces where there's some red blood. Anyway, but down inside, it was just saturated with blood. Once you get the top off, there's blood inside these rocks. As much blood as you can possibly want. And you hear how hard that is? This was a product of the Great Flood. Now, you see that texture here? That's because that was just like laying on here, just like this is. You just peeled it off. And there's the sweat pores right there. You see? There's the two sweat pores. My thumb is about as wide as that one finger ridge. And this is this layer, and it is a layer. There's no fracture in here. That was just almost like it was glued on there. When I whacked it and it popped off, I was very surprised. I thought I was going to really have to do some whacking, and I just hit it, not even that hard. I think I hit it right about there, just bang, and it just popped off. So anyway, that's my evidence, and this has also been DNA tested. And it said it was excellent quality DNA. It was just like red blood. All the stuff I sent in, and I had 3 samples, were just as good as if you just took them out of somebody's artery. Well, that's actually not true. The lung and that huge fingertip, flawless, excellent quality. This is a CAT scan of of a thumb. That's a thumb. From a giant hand. It's not giant, but this is because it was big enough to CAT scan. I don't know, it's about 7 inches or something like that. These are the tendons. You see, 2 different colors. You see the hole right there? You see the hole right there? That's some blood vessels going up there. This is the back of the bone. Now this is 2D. This is the outside with every different texture that they can get out of it by taking pictures from every different angle and getting all these different. So you can, well, here's the fingertip. You would never see that stuff. You see this? This is it right here. Now I have this on because I broke this piece off here. You see, it was fractured even when I sent it off to get it tested. And it broke off right along the seam of the bone. It hugs right up to the bone. But you wouldn't see this without being in the CAT scan. Anyway, that covers that. Now, my point is, I have every single thing. I have the DNA tests, I have the CAT scans. I'm showing you this is the same as muscle. This has to be taken seriously. We have to look at this with open, fresh eyeballs. This is basically the same cuts as at Petra. But anyway, the hand, which was when the fingertip was from this hand, I have knuckles and so forth too. That was not dense and excellent quality, but they did say there was no question it was not contaminated, and it did have human mitochondrial DNA in there. It just wasn't excellent quality. But the other 2 were excellent quality. The lung, which is here, and has just red raw blood coming out of there. This is where the blood is really dense in the bottom of the lung, easy. And this is all from the Great Flood. It's flat, like just like this. Same thing with here. That was laying flat back here. And when it all washed off, that's what was left. And basically almost all my stuff is flat on one side. Even my buddy here, Caesar. That's a goose. Caesar Augustus. There's his feathers. Everything that died in the Great Flood was boiled out, and all the organic stuff went out. And then whatever was left around that area came back in. It's called nucleophilic substitution and invasion, because this had to petrify. And you can see his throat and everything. You see that throat coming down there? He died, same thing, like that. And snapped his head. There's his throat right there. I've shown these things many, many times. Now, let's finish up with Petra here. Okay, this is where it becomes an anatomy lesson, because if you don't understand it, you won't understand it's true. It's just so far beyond the belief of the average human mind. But this is muscles, and they come in these little blocks called sarcomeres. Now, if we look at the treasury very closely here, and we look at these blocks, that's a sarcomere. That is a sarcomere. They're all sarcomeres. And these are the layers in between the sarcomeres. There's a flat layer in between every one of these sarcomeres. Now these are all scuffed up, I don't know why. But this would be the traditional, I mean the exact, you see this different colorization here? And this different patterning here? And this little line right there. That's what sarcomeres are. Now, this was packed with blood. That was literally packed with blood, as far as I can determine. And it ran like this, around in a circle. You see this down here? If this was a circle of blood, blood settles. And the heavier stuff settles, and it has a different texture to it. And it settled down here. And they just carved right into it. Whatever was there, they carved in. And it was so wet, in my opinion, that they had to put these little air holes in here to let the moisture come out from the blood, so the blood would settle in and become this red stuff here, just like this. Just like this. And you know what this is? This is a lung. That's a lung. Watch this. That, my friends, is a lung. Look at it suck that water up. Done. And there's the latch that's on the lung. I show this stuff all the time. I have the microscope going. I probably show this one. This is the same sort of stuff. It's red blood. This just happened to end up having almost all the red blood in it, but you can see the black too. That's what blood is red and black. Now, in the muscle, you can see it here as well. You can see it in the red and black. It's always that way. Blood is two different states of oxygenation. There's red and there's black primarily. Then there's a yellow stage, which is the transferation. Anyway, let's just look inside the treasury, and I'll show you meat. There's literally meat inside there. You can see it, which was on the walls of the treasury, and I suppose they dug in and made, I don't know how big it gets in there, but inside, I'll show you. And a person standing here is only going to stand up to about this tall. These people had to be pretty good size back then, still. You see that? You talk to anybody that's ever been inside of an animal, or a doctor, or a surgeon, or somebody that hunts and slaughters, a butcher. There's no question whatsoever what that is. And there was blood coming out through here to serve as something in there. But this is dug right into, they just used what was there. And they did an elegant job of carving it up. These people were sophisticated people. Now, my claim, well, not necessarily a claim, but it's my theory, is that this was after the Great Flood. This was not before. This was after, and all that stuff ran out, creating all those little valleys and all that stuff. You know, the cuts through the arteries, because that's where the blood would run out as the waters receded. Okay, I'm trying to keep track of what I have and have not shown you. These are the sarcomeres. Now, these are the same sarcomeres. And you see this is bigger, I mean smaller and smaller, and we get down to the actual sarcomere. You see the black and dark, and then this color, and then you have they call it I band. I always heard it was a Z band, but who cares? There's that wall on each side of the sarcomere. Now, did we see that at Petra? I think we did. You see that color? You see this? They just chopped right into these. You see these? These are the blocks. Each one of those is a sarcomere. And sarcomeres are pretty damn small, my friends. All right. These here come down to these. These come down to these. And that's what we're looking at Petra. Now, I have other places I can show you where we have these muscle tissues, and there's a lot of places. Now, I have all of this stuff in my shop in small creature form. You know, when I say small, some of it's not too small. Like I showed you the hair follicle, it's 2 inches wide. I have the hand and the big fingers and all that stuff. Now, so I've shown you all this stuff in Petra. What about above Petra? Above Petra is this. Connective tissue. This is all connective tissue. I have all of this stuff in my shop just as well. And I have the same sort of stuff, and I have an artery and all that, and I'm going to show you right now. And a muscle, and I have the same looking stone that's in Petra. You've seen the Petra one. I got the exact same thing here. And these are tendon fibers. And they snap right off just like that. Nobody carved that. Nobody carved the bottom. They just chiseled off this stuff here, which is the Slurpee that wraps around it. And they were going to snap this off, and just 2 or 3 guys would carry that somewhere. These creatures were enormous. And they were working with the Baalbek stones. Now, I have that exact same thing here. Watch. Here's mine right here. You see that? That's exactly identical to the Baalbek stone. But it still has that Slurpee on the outside. They would knock that stuff off. And that stuff is there so that it can slide among the other ones, because it's going to have all this stuff to slide against. You see how this one steps back just a taste? This they do this. That's why they have to have that slit there, and that slit has to have Slurpee in it. Now, the Slurpee means small, leucine-rich proteins. And this thing glues right up here. I mean glues. It just glues there. And this stuff goes into a little cavities in the end and holds that tighter than as tight as you can imagine. That's the investment of a tendon into muscle or bone or whatever. When they lock in, they lock in. And that's what it is right there. It's just, that was where the glue is, right here. And that's where this was. And there's this Slurpee runs right around every one of those. There's another one of these underneath. They're all over. These there's just not one of these. There's a bazillion of them in a bundle. There's just not one. They're all, tendons are a lot of them together in one bundle. Now I'll show you the ones I have here. Don't forget now. This I showed you, well, let me find it here. This right here was what I was showing you before, where the tendon locks in, right about in here somewhere. It was in a microscope, and it's down in here somewhere. This is tendon. And it locks into the muscle, into the bone right here. And you see that circle? That's the pivot. Your whole shoulder and whatever has to do all this. So these have to slide among themselves when they tip up this way and tip down this way. But that's a pivot. And it locks into the bone. Right here. You see that pivot point? It locks right here into that bone. They're tighter than tight. And then this is another device that holds this so that it can go this way and this way and this way and this way. It's an elegant device. And from here over, I think this is where, right in the area where I was showing the Baalbek stones. From here to here is tendon only. You see it? From here to here, 100% tendon. And that is tough, and that stays, and I'll show you where it stayed in the ocean. The bone washed away, the muscle washed away. You see the red stuff here? That's because this is muscle. You see, these are the arteries feeding that muscle. They don't feed tendon. Tendon doesn't need it. Tendon has this synovial fluid in there, and it just stays there. And it's slippery as slippery can be. But from here down, at this abrupt transition, you start to transition into muscle. And there's like 2 or 3 transition zones until you get way out here where there's just nothing but fibers. Pretty much. Here, you got almost all connective tissue as it starts to come into muscle. And then the fibers start to break more and more, and then you get in primarily muscle. It's still got a lot of connective tissue in it, but not like here. These are long straps. The connective tissue that's in this are a little shorter. But anyway, in an ocean, this would get washed and washed and washed. And this would get washed away because it's bone. They didn't hold up. The bones didn't hold up, especially not in the salt waters. And this, the muscle would wash away because it's weaker. This tendon, no. Can I prove that? Yes. Here's another example of how wrong they are. That right there is that piece of tendon I was just showing you. That right there is that pin. This is the main strap of the tendon in the center. You see how many slats there are in here? That is not erosion. They're saying millions of years in one picture just kept eroding. Why is it just here in this one little strip? That is a tendon enthesis between the bone, which would have been right here, attached to that. Right there would have been a bone. And from here over would have been the muscle. And the muscle just erodes. It's just weak. This stuff here is tough. This is tough, 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 or tougher. And every one of those little slats would have gone this way and that way. When you had to turn up this way or turn down that way, they had to do this. And they pivoted on that pin. And this is not millions of years. This is an hour or two the guy died. These were giants. Everything was written about this. This is not a joke. And Petra is not a joke either. I showed you about Petra, and if you can come up with a different explanation, I want to hear it. And like I said, this is the sarcomeres. This is Petra. The same thing. This is Petra. And Bennu is the same thing. They came back with the same exact stuff. All right, here's that little lung in the microscope. And there's a bloody spot leaking out. And all these little black dots are the tags that normally had the fascia wrapping around in that, and that's all eroded out. And now we're left with this here. And all of those balls would have had straps. And the straps were from the fascia. They're gone now. But most of the balls are still here. In that particular spot, some blood is leaking back out. And again, that spot is the area where it locks in to the body. This bump right here is where this lung locked in. And there's, you see those two little colored spots here? Right in here is where it locks in to the to the side of your body, the viscera, and that's what holds the lung in position. Now I'm going to put some water on here, and you'll see a little bit better. You know, you'll be able to see a little bit better. You see little black balls? They're all over the place. Those had straps attached to them. All that stuff is weak stuff. The balls are not so weak, so they're still here. You see how quick it's sucking that stuff up? There are some lines running through here. But that's why those balls are there. And that's this little lung right here. And it's pretty much turned solid blood. And that'll happen. The heart probably drained right into it. Okay, we've been focusing on muscle, but wherever you're going to have muscle, eventually you're going to have connective tissue that connects it to bone or wherever it does. Now this is right in the area with Petra right here. That's connective tissue. All right, a little bit of an anatomy lesson. You got all kinds of muscle, blood, bones, connective tissue, all these kind of things here. Now, wherever there's going to be a muscle, eventually there's going to be a connective tissue that connects it to wherever that muscle is going to pull against. And that it requires tendons. And what's the deal with tendons? We haven't looked at tendons yet too well. All right. Pay close attention to this. There's a couple things I want to point out. These are what tendons look like, and they have all these little fibers, and I mean there is thousands of them in these bundles. I mean literally thousands, as I will show you in a second. This is extreme magnification, and you can see all those little blocks. Now, looking at it in a real close-up, we can see all these different colors. And you say, well, what is that? Why are those different colors? Because collagens come in, I believe it's 20 or 28 different flavors. And every one of these colors represents a different tensile strength, flexibility, elasticity, whatever. And then you bundle them up in a bundle here, and you have all that different stuff going on at the same time in that same bundle. It's very, very, very elegant system. And your tendons are very, very, very tough. And that's why the one I showed in the ocean didn't disintegrate. Knock something over. All right, sorry about that. Now let's continue on, now that we know what tendons look like in their extreme closeness. Now, what are we looking at here? Well, this is Devil's Causeway, Giant's Causeway. And these are the same blocks. You see these blocks right here? They're the same blocks. Now, this is from a creature's body. This is not a causeway they built so they could go fight each other, Finn McCool and the other guy. Now, what does it look like here? Look. Same thing. This is Giant's Causeway. These guys are out here having a good time paddling through tendons. And this is what tendons look like. They come down in these little ropes. And then the ropes turn into these. And then those have a bazillion of these inside of them. And then these have a bazillion of these inside of those, and these have a bazillion of these. And so by the time it gets to the end, at the fibril, it's almost nothing there. But there's so many as he goes back. The strength is just incredible. And those are them. Those are them. That's what a tendon looks like. And that's just what we're showing here, showing here, showing here. And they break off flat because they're made in little chunks. They don't show it here in these little chunks, but they are made in, as I showed you, they are made in these little bitty chunks. And as they filter down, they come down to a point where there's just, it could be hundreds of thousands of little fibers in one rope of fiber there. So I've shown you all of the tendons. I've shown you Petra, where the blood vessels would have run, the sarcomeres, the connective tissue that's right above there. I've shown you my giants, my giant hair follicle, my giant hand, CAT scan finger, all that stuff DNA tested. I showed you my lungs, I showed you the big artery, and that's what it is. This is tendon under extreme magnification. And see the different colors? This was from a guy, Jim Burchell, who I worked with, and I felt so bad about this because this was shown on the History Channel, which I'd love to engage again with them because I think I have the evidence now to prove what I'm saying. It was shown and said, oh, that's just carved. And I engaged with Scott Walters, dismissed it within less than 1 minute on TV, and then it was, I had to fight with Yale about this whole thing, showing it, and nobody would, and we had a CAT scan and everything. I felt terrible. It cost them a lot of money. I said, this is no question, that's real, and it is real. You see his nose? It's split back. Look real quick, careful at the details. You see the flesh is split back there? You see the red blood is coming out of the side of his nose there? You see the black and the red? We're mud fossil people. We have mud fossil eyes. We understand the red and the black is blood. Up here, this is a hat. And if you look real close, you can see the actual weave of the hat. You may not be able to see it, but it's there. I think that's a pretty good shot of it right there. You see the little holes all the way across? That's not his hair, that's a hat. And you can slide a playing card up underneath between this, where it comes around and up. So anyway, I'd love to be able to talk to History Channel and say, I'd like to have this reshown using mud fossil eyes, because that was at least 10 years ago. So things change. Things change. What didn't I show you? Well, I showed you the muscle that's here in my shop. That's a muscle right there, and that's the tendon. And back here was the bone. And that's the pin that allows it to pivot like this and that. That's the artery that supplies the blood for the muscle. Connective tissue, which brings it back into the sarcomeres. I didn't show you this. They say scientists, I don't know, they said it's some kind of bacteria made this. Well, no. That's about it. But it's like this here. It's the same as this. Only this was in an area where there's a lot of red blood. This was in an area where all that stuff washed out. Same stuff. Very identical. No difference whatsoever. You know, this could have been on a lung, this could have been on a kidney, it could have been around a heart, I don't know. But everything has tissue that surrounds it in layers. That's the way the human body's built. And these are protective layers, and there's supposed to be bacteria living in these layers. I agree that bacteria are in here. But those are the bacteria that lived in this creature's body when it was alive, creating enzymes to support its life. All right, I haven't shown you this. This is sarcomeres in stone. This is stone, and these are the sarcomeres, and this is blood that was in there, which is solidified in these layers. Now, if this was twisted this way, and that blood ran out downhill, you'd have pockets in here. And these sarcomeres break on these blocky lines, and this would collapse, and it did in Turkey. I showed this. Where's Turkey? There it is right here. Those are those sarcomeres. These blocks. You see the little layers in between? And here's where some red blood was coming in. These guys are standing here. This whole area collapsed. There's some red blood coming in. These layers are the layers of sarcomeres, and they have turned to, I don't know what kind of stone this is, but they will turn to whatever the chemistry in that area was. But my feeling here is, I'm pretty sure that underneath, somewhere under here, blood was under there and it ran out down the hill. Now they may be able to, because this is on a downhill slope, And there's the red blood here. It's not leaking downhill, but there could have been, just like I showed you here, layers like this underneath somewhere, and they ran out somehow. Because that could happen. Because that's what caves are. That's what caves are. It was blood ran out of arteries in a lot of cases. And in this case, those sarcomeres look hard to me. They look fractury, cracky. These are not like putty sarcomeres. These changed somehow into a real hard, cracky type of substance. Easily fractured. And this is in Turkey. Now, if this was just normal sarcomeres and there was just plenty of blood in here and so forth, maybe it wouldn't do this. It depends on what's underneath the soils. I mean, how did they preserve? And were these from the Great Flood, or was this, there's a lot of questions to be answered. I have a lot of questions and I have some pretty good answers already. We know about the sarcomeres. That's blood, that's sarcomeres from a heart. And here's where it's ripped. And one of the most fortuitous things I've ever seen, somebody sent me a picture of sarcomeres with a rip in it. It's around here somewhere. It's just stunning. Look at this. These are those sarcomeres. All the red blood's run out of it. This is a layer of black. You see this? All the way up to here is black. That should not be there. The reason it's there is because of this rip. You see this? That's a rip across the sarcomeres. They don't do that. They break at those I bands, Z bands. I always call them Z bands, but I sell I bands. Right there. That should not break like this. But I showed you a heart attack victim has exactly the same thing happen. Now don't forget, this is a fracture. Not supposed to be on a sideways cut like that. They're standing in a fracture. It's stunning. Things have fallen into my lap that I just can't explain. I can explain them, but I can't explain why. This is the black stuff. And all the red stuff has eroded out and left those sarcomeres behind. And where else did this happen? They want to go to Mars? Well, guess what's up on Mars? Sarcomeres. There they are right there. And they have just dusted out because it's all very, very dry, and these are wet and gooey normally, and they just dusted out and fell out. These are the sarcomeres. These are the I bands, the Z bands, whatever you want to call them. And these are the sarcomeres. Continually over many millions of years. No, absolutely not. This is where they got everything wrong. This just happened when Mars got hit by Venus. And that was all recorded by Velikovsky, and every culture on Earth had the same story. And we've laughed at it because it's just too spectacular to admit that it's possible. These are, as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing but biology. And Bennu is nothing more than a heart. And they have that here on Earth. They've examined it. They can see it. They know that's true. They must know that. I can't believe there's anybody as that incompetent to say, no, that's not true. So what's the ultimate goal here? Is truth the ultimate goal? I don't know. Millions of years in one picture? No. That little piece of tendon is a piece of tendon. That just happened when everything else died. But it was a hot, boiling, salty, silicate-rich ocean at this particular time, boiling. The whole world was boiling, the oceans, the rivers, everything. I don't know how they survived. I really don't. They must have hidden somewhere way up high in some caves or whatever. And not just Noah survived, but this was, I believe, that great flood. And these creatures were enormous, and as far as I'm concerned, there were gods in control, and Jupiter sent Venus to destroy Earth, well, at least to just giant, crazy creatures that were on Earth, and then destroy Mars, who was the god of war, because there was nothing but chaos in the heavens. They were fighting and battling, blowing people up, and that's why all of this stuff, even as meteorites coming through space, there's red blood in there. There's red blood and black, because that was a piece of biology. They're all biological. Everything there is I can find is biological. And I'm going to show you Bennu, and then we'll call it a day. All right, this is about Asteroid Bennu. National Science Foundation, Smithsonian, everybody's involved in this. How can we get a better understanding of this asteroid? Well, they went out there and they landed on this, sunk deep inside, which they didn't expect, and grabbed a chunk of it and came back to Earth with it. Now, I want you to see some of these characteristics, and I'll explain them in a minute. That is Bennu. What they came back with was heart sarcomeres. And here they are right here. I showed you the sarcomeres. You know about these bundles. That right there is the ropes. When you cut this way and look down into these ropes, you see the sarcomeres. They pull in like this. So you got the rope continues on like that, and the sarcomeres pull in this way, and these are the sarcomeres. So we're looking at them from both directions, into the rope and down onto the sarcomeres. And in between the sarcomeres, there's these membranes, which are the phospholipid membranes. This contains all of the chemistry that's in the human body. Amino acids, DNA, RNA, uracil, every single chemistry there is, and it is identical anatomically to heart muscle. And where they landed on was a heart. And this is what hearts look like. This is when you're looking down into the chambers, and this is Psyche, which is another heart in space. These gods were having battles into space, and they were absolutely gigantically enormous creatures. This is Psyche. This is fabulously enormous. That's a tube coming out. That's a tube coming out. So is that. These two different colors are because they're two different blood types. Well, oxygenation states. And then you got the red, the black, and the yellow. We all understand that. This is the tendon that wraps around to hold the muscle. That is a heart, and so is Bennu. And they came back with that. Now, this shows where it breaks. They break right along this line. And the plumbing just comes right off the top, and then you're looking down into the valves. And the whole plumbing comes off the top. All right, so I've shown that. Now, I showed you Mars has its sarcomeres. Mars is nothing more than the Earth, same thing. Earth has the same stuff. It's all made of biology, gigantic, gigantic, gigantic biology. All the ancient cultures had the same story. The Earth was made out of some Tiamat or Gaia or Kingu, or I don't know. There's so many different things now that we have to study it and learn and understand. This is not silly. And there's places that just, there's no denying what they are. You can only dismiss it and continue to spew out the dogma. And I don't think that's being fair to the students that are paying these very, very prestigious institutions that are not, in my opinion, doing their job. So maybe Trump would like to take that on. If you want truth, you want truth social, you want society to have truth, that's what I would think truth social is all about. Societal truth. Not just politics. This, my friends, starts everything over again. This is a new universe. You walked into a brand new universe. All right, I love you. Bye.